Hey folks, your friend's back with another wild tale. Tonight I've got something special for you. A mystery from the deep south, where fog hides more than just trees. What if I told you there are guardians in the marsh, spirits with rusted swords who decide who lives and who gets lost forever? Grab your lantern, because this mystery is about to begin. The horse didn't want to go forward. Samuel tugged the reins gently, making a clicking sound with his tongue. Come on now, girl, it's just water and trees. But the mare knew better. Her ears flicked back and forth, catching sounds Samuel couldn't hear yet. She took one step, then another, hooves sucking at the mud with each movement. The path, if you could call it that, wound between cypress trees that stood like old men with their feet in the water. It was nearly 9 o'clock. Samuel figured he had maybe 3 hours before midnight, and he really didn't want to spend those hours out here. The town of La Grasse sat somewhere ahead, probably 2 miles, maybe 3, hard to tell in a swamp. Distance got funny when everything looked the same. Black water, gray moss, trees that bent in ways trees shouldn't bend. He'd stopped at a trading post that afternoon, back where the solid ground ended. The old woman running the place had looked at him like he'd announced plans to jump off a cliff. "You going through the marsh?" she'd asked. "At night?" "Road's faster," Samuel had said, which was true. Going around would add a whole day. Faster to where? Your grave? Samuel had laughed at that. He was good at laughing at things, made life easier. "Ma'am, I've been through worse than some wet trees." The old woman had sold in the lantern without another word, but as he was leaving, she'd called out, "If you see lights where no road exists, keep your eyes down. And if you hear bells, well, just move fast." Samuel had waved and smiled. Old folks always had stories. Now, riding through the actual marsh with fog creeping around his horse's legs, those stories felt less funny. The lantern swung from his saddle, throwing weak yellow light that barely reached past the horse's head. Everything else was shades of black and gray. Water reflected the clouded moon. Somewhere a frog croaked, then another, then what sounded like 100 of them all at once, like they were laughing at some joke Samuel wasn't part of. "At least someone's having fun," he muttered. The horse snorted. She was a good horse, steady and smart. Her name was Molly, and she'd carried Samuel across 3 states without complaint. But even she seemed nervous now, stepping careful, testing each bit of ground before putting her weight down. The path curved around a massive cypress, its roots spread out like fingers dipping into water so dark it looked solid. Moss hung from the branches, swaying even though Samuel couldn't feel any wind. Something splashed off to the left. Samuel turned his head. Just ripples spreading across the water. Probably a fish, or a turtle, or a gator. He really hoped it wasn't a gator. "You know what's funny, Molly?" Samuel said, because talking helped. "I left Virginia to get away from trouble. Thought I'd find some nice quiet work out west, and here I am, riding through a swamp at night like some kind of idiot." Molly flicked one ear back, listening. "My brother told me. He said, 'Sam, you're gonna get yourself killed doing stupid things.' And I said, 'James, you worry too much.' Guess we'll find out who was right." Another splash, closer this time. Samuel touched the rifle in its sheath just to make sure it was there. He wasn't planning to shoot anything, but knowing he could made him feel better. The frogs went quiet, all at once, like someone had given a signal. 1 second, the air was full of croaking, and then nothing. Just the soft plop of water dripping from trees and the wet sound of Molly's hooves. That wasn't good. Samuel had been around nature enough to know that when every animal suddenly shuts up, there's usually a reason. Samuel pulled Molly to a stop. "Easy," he whispered.
They waited there, horse and rider, in a small pocket of lantern light surrounded by darkness. Samuel's hand rested on the rifle. His eyes moved across the shadows, trying to see what? He didn't even know. A full minute passed. Nothing happened. Samuel let out a breath. "We're spooking ourselves, girl. Come on." But as they started moving again, he could have sworn he saw something, just at the edge of the lantern's reach, a shape, tall and thin, standing between two trees. He blinked. Nothing there. "Road's faster," he said to himself, mimicking what he'd told the old woman. "Sure is, Sam. Real smart thinking." The path widened a bit, and the ground felt slightly more solid. Maybe he was getting close to LaGrasse. The town couldn't be far now. He'd have a drink, find a bed, and in the morning this would all seem silly. That's when he heard the bell. It was distant, soft, almost like wind chimes, a gentle ringing that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. Samuel pulled Molly to a stop. "If you hear bells..." The old woman hadn't finished that sentence, just said to move fast. But Samuel wasn't sure which direction fast was supposed to be. Forward? Back? The bell sound didn't seem to come from any particular spot. It just was. Molly shifted, uneasy. "I know," Samuel said quietly. "I hear it too." The ringing continued. Not scary exactly, actually kind of peaceful, like church bells on a Sunday morning, but wrong somehow. Too gentle for a place like this. Then he saw the light. It floated between the trees, maybe 50 yards ahead, blue-white, cold, moving slow like someone walking. But there was no path there, just water and roots and mud. Samuel's throat went dry. The light drifted to the left, then paused, then continued, tracing a line through the swamp where no person could walk. If you see lights where no road exists, keep your eyes down. Samuel looked down. He stared at Molly's mane, at the saddle horn, at his own hands holding the reins. The bell kept ringing, soft and steady. He could feel the light even with his eyes down, could sense it moving, getting closer maybe, or farther away. Hard to tell. "We're fine," he whispered. "We're just passing through. No trouble." Who was he talking to? The swamp? God? Himself? Molly shifted, and Samuel looked up. He couldn't help it. The light had multiplied. Now there were 3 of them, blue-white and cold, drifting in a triangle pattern. They moved together, like they were searching for something or guarding something. And behind the lights, deeper in the fog, shapes, human shapes. Samuel's hand tightened on the reins. They stood between the trees like statues, tall figures, maybe 7 or 8 of them, scattered through the swamp, some close, some far. Hard to make out details in the fog and darkness, but they were definitely there, definitely watching. One of them stood on a small island of roots. It held something long and straight, a staff maybe? Or, Samuel squinted, a sword, an old one from the look of it, the kind knights carried in the stories his grandmother used to tell. The blade was rusted, pitted, but unmistakable. The figure didn't move, none of them did. They just stood there, patient as the trees themselves. The bell rang again, 3 clear notes, and Samuel understood somehow that it was a warning, not a threat, a warning. "This is our place. Pass carefully." "Okay," he said out loud. "Okay, I'm just passing through. No disrespect meant." His voice sounded strange in the quiet, too loud, too human. One of the figures tilted its head just slightly, listening. Samuel held his breath. Then, slowly, the figure turned away, looked back into the deeper swamp. The others did the same, one by one, turning their attention elsewhere. The lights drifted farther off, moving between the trees like lanterns carried by people Samuel couldn't quite see. Molly took a tentative step forward. "Yeah," Samuel whispered. "Let's keep moving." They continued down the path, moving carefully, steadily. Samuel didn't look directly at the figures anymore, but he could see them in his peripheral vision. Silent watchers, sometimes close, sometimes far, always still. The bell rang occasionally, sometimes ahead, sometimes behind, never threatening, just there, marking time maybe, or marking boundaries. After what felt like an hour, but was probably only 20 minutes, the cypress trees started to thin out. The water receded, the ground became almost solid, and ahead through the fog, Samuel could see actual lights, yellow ones, warm ones, windows. La Grasse. He'd made it. The town wasn't much, a cluster of shacks built on stilts, a dock, a few boats tied up for the night, but it looked like paradise to Samuel right then. As Molly stepped onto the main road, a generous word for the muddy track between buildings, the fog seemed to pull back like a curtain closing. Samuel turned in his saddle, looking back at the marsh.
The figures were still there, at the edge of town, standing in a line, almost like soldiers at attention. The blue lights floated around them, patient and cold. One figure stood slightly ahead of the others, the one with the sword. It didn't wave or gesture, but Samuel felt acknowledgement, like a nod between travelers. He touched his hat brim. "Thank you," he said quietly. The figure didn't move, but the lights seemed to pulse once, gentle. Then the fog rolled in thick, and they were gone. Samuel found a small boarding house near the dock. The woman who ran it was half asleep, but happy to take his money. She showed him to a room barely big enough for the bed it contained. "You came through the marsh?" she asked, seeing the mud on his boots. "Yes, ma'am." "At night?" Seemed like a good idea at the time. She shook her head, the way people do when they think you're lucky and stupid in equal measure. "Well, you're braver than most, or crazier, hard to say which." After she left, Samuel sat on the edge of the bed and pulled off his boots. Through the thin walls he could hear the swamp, frogs croaking again, water lapping at the pilings, the creak of the dock, and, very faint, almost imagined, the sound of a bell. He went to the window and looked out. The marsh was just darkness and fog now, no lights, no figures. But Samuel had the strangest feeling they were still there, still standing guard, patient as stone, watching over their territory the way ancient soldiers watched over castles in the stories. What were they protecting? Who had they been? He'd probably never know. Samuel lay down, pulling the thin blanket up. Tomorrow he'd continue west, find work, start fresh. But tonight he'd been allowed to pass through their domain, and somehow, despite everything, he'd felt safe, like those silent guardians weren't there to harm travelers, just to make sure the swamp's secrets stayed secret. His last thought before sleep took him was of that figure with the rusted sword standing patient in the fog. And in the marsh, the old guardians returned to their patient silence.
Samuel woke up to the smell of fish and coffee. For a moment, he forgot where he was. Then the memories came back. The marsh, the figures, those cold blue lights. He sat up fast, looking around the small room like he expected to find someone standing in the corner. Just walls and a window, morning light coming through, gray and weak. He let out a breath. "You're fine, Sam. Just a weird night." But getting dressed, pulling on his still damp boots, he couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed, like he'd crossed more than just a swamp last night, like he'd passed some kind of test he hadn't known he was taking. Downstairs, the boarding house woman had breakfast laid out, fried fish, hard bread, coffee so strong it could probably wake the dead. "Sleep well?" she asked. "Like a log," Samuel lied. Two other men sat at the table, local fishermen by the look of them. They had that weathered appearance people get when they work outside in wet places. One was missing 2 fingers on his left hand. The other had a scar running from his ear to his chin. "You the feller came through the marsh last night?" the scarred one asked. Word traveled fast in small towns. "That's me," Samuel said, sitting down. "Why don't people usually?" The 2 men exchanged a look. "Some do," the one with missing fingers said slowly. "Most go around." "The ones that go through," the scarred man started, then stopped. "Well, they usually come out telling stories." "What kind of stories?" Another exchanged look. "Lights," the scarred man said finally. "Figures in the fog. Bells ringing where no church stands." Samuel's coffee cup stopped halfway to his mouth. "You believe in all that?" The man with missing fingers held up his damaged hand. "Lost these to a gator, not a ghost. I believe in what I can touch. But," he paused, "I've lived here 30 years, fished that swamp in every season, every kind of weather, and I've seen things I can't explain." "Like what?" "Like people who shouldn't be there, standing in water up to their waist, not moving, not drowning, wearing old clothes, carrying old weapons. Sometimes just watching. Sometimes," he trailed off. "Sometimes what?" Samuel asked. The scarred man leaned forward. "Sometimes helping. My cousin got lost out there about 5 years back. Fog came down thick. He couldn't find his way. Said he saw a light, followed it, and it led him straight to the main path. When he turned to say thanks, nothing there." "Could have been someone with a lantern," Samuel said, though even as he said it, he knew better. "Could have been," the man agreed, "but his boat was found 3 miles from where he ended up, and the light he followed, he said it was blue, cold blue like winter stars." Samuel set down his coffee cup. "You saw him," the woman said, not a question. She was standing in the doorway to the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. "You saw something," Samuel admitted. "Lights, shapes, thought maybe I was just tired." "You weren't tired. The marsh has guardians, old ones, been there longer than this town, longer than any of us. Nobody knows who they were in life, but in death," she shrugged, "they keep watch." "Keep watch over what?" "The old ways," the woman said simply. "The places between. Some things aren't meant to change, even when everything else does." Samuel had planned to leave that morning, head west, put the marsh behind him. But something made him hesitate. He walked down to the dock, watching fishermen prepare their boats. The water was brown-green, murky, with patches of vegetation floating on the surface. In daylight, the swamp looked less mysterious, just a wetland, full of life and decay in equal measure. But he kept thinking about those figures, the patient way they'd stood, the warning in that bell. An old man sat at the end of the dock, mending a net. He had to be 70 at least, with hands gnarled from decades of work. "Morning," Samuel said. "Morning," the old man replied without looking up. "You the one came through last night?" Samuel almost laughed. Does everyone in this town know everyone else's business? Not much else to know. Not much else happens. He tied off a knot, examining his work. But when someone crosses the marsh at night and lives to tell about it, that's worth knowing. I wasn't in danger, Samuel said, though he wasn't entirely sure that was true. Maybe, maybe not. The old man finally looked up. His eyes were pale blue, faded like old denim. The guardians choose who passes and who doesn't. You passed. That means something. What does it mean? Means you respected them. Means you listened. He went back to his net. Most people don't listen anymore. Too busy, too sure of themselves. The guardians don't take kindly to that. What happens if you don't listen? The old man was quiet for a long moment. People get lost. Sometimes they find their way out. Sometimes, well, he shrugged. The marsh keeps what it wants to keep. A chill ran down Samuel's spine, despite the morning warmth. There's stories, you know, old stories, from before this town existed. They say the guardians were knights once, holy knights, protecting pilgrims traveling through dangerous lands. When they died, they didn't rest, couldn't rest. Their duty remained. Knights? Out here? Not here, exactly, but the swamp remembers. Land has memory, same as people, and some duties run deeper than death. Samuel thought about the figure with the rusted sword, a knight's sword. Why would they still guard? What's left to protect? The paths between worlds, the old man said simply. Places where the veil is thin. The marsh is one such place, always has been. The guardians make sure nothing crosses over that shouldn't, and nothing gets trapped that should be free. You really believe all this? The old man smiled, showing gaps where teeth used to be. Doesn't matter what I believe. Matters what is. Samuel spent the day in La Grasse restless. He told himself he was letting Molly rest, but that wasn't quite true. Something was pulling at him, a question he couldn't quite form. Late afternoon, he found himself back at the edge of town, looking at the marsh. The fog was starting to roll in again, earlier than last night. The cypress trees stood dark against the graying sky. Thinking about going back in? Samuel turned. The boarding house woman stood behind him, carrying a basket of laundry. No, he said. Then, more honestly, maybe. People who see the guardians sometimes feel called, like there's something they need to understand. But I'll warn you, going in twice is different than going in once. Second time, they might expect something of you. Like what? Can't say. It's different for everyone. She shifted the basket to her other hip. My husband saw them years ago, went back in the next night, came out changed. Never talked much about what happened, but he started helping people after that. Ferry service for folks who needed to cross at night, made sure they got through safe. Did it for free, right up until he died. The guardians asked him to do that? Didn't ask, but he knew it was his purpose after that, like they'd shown him something and he couldn't unknow it. Samuel looked back at the marsh. The fog was thicker now, moving between the trees like something alive. If I went back, he said slowly, just to, I don't know, see them again, would that be stupid? The woman considered this. Stupid? Maybe. Brave? Possibly.
necessary? She smiled. Only you can answer that.
Samuel told himself he'd just ride to the edge. Just look. Just see if they were there. But as Molly carried him into the marsh for the second time, he knew he was lying to himself. He wanted answers, wanted to understand what he'd felt last night, that strange sense of peace, of belonging, even in the presence of things that shouldn't exist. The path looked different in late afternoon light. The water gleamed like oil. Birds called from the trees, herons maybe, or cranes. Normal sounds, daylight sounds. But as the sun sank lower and the fog rose higher, those sounds faded. Molly moved carefully, remembering the route from last night. Smart horse. She seemed less afraid this time, like she understood these guardians better now. Samuel had brought the lantern again, though he hadn't lit it yet. Didn't seem right to bring fire until the darkness required it. The cypress trees closed in, the path narrowed, and then, just as the last light faded from the sky, Samuel heard it. The bell. 3 soft chimes, like a greeting. He stopped Molly and waited. The blue lights appeared, one by one, not searching this time, waiting. They formed a half circle ahead of him, patient and cold, and between them, the figures. Samuel could see them more clearly now, or maybe they were choosing to be seen. Tall men, they were definitely men, or had been, wearing clothes from another age, rough tunics, leather bracers, boots that came to the knee. Each one carried something, a sword, a staff. One held what looked like an old shield, battered and scarred. The one Samuel remembered, the one with the rusted sword, stood in the center. It looked at him, really looked, with eyes Samuel couldn't quite see, but could definitely feel. "I came back," Samuel said, feeling foolish. "I don't know why. I just needed to." The figure didn't respond, didn't move, but the bell rang once more, and Samuel understood. Come. The lights began to move, drifting deeper into the marsh, off the path, into the water and fog. Samuel hesitated. Following them last night was one thing. He'd been trying to get through. But now, this was different. This was a choice. Molly shifted beneath him, waiting for a decision. If you hear bells, move fast. But the old woman at the trading post had been talking about running away. What if moving fast meant moving toward? Samuel touched his heels to Molly's sides. "Okay, girl, let's see where they want us to go." They left the path. The ground was soft but solid enough to support the horse. The guardians moved ahead, gliding between trees, their lights making the fog glow. The one with the sword led them, his tall figure cutting through the mist like a ship's prow through water. They traveled for maybe 20 minutes. Time felt strange here, stretched and compressed at once. Samuel passed trees that looked hundreds of years old, their roots forming arches over black water. He saw flowers that shouldn't bloom at night, glowing faintly with their own light. And then they came to a clearing. It was a small island in the swamp, maybe 30 feet across, solid ground covered in moss. And in the center, a circle of stones, old stones, ancient ones, carved with symbols Samuel didn't recognize, but that made something deep in his chest ache when he looked at them. The guardians formed a ring around the stones. The blue lights hovered above them. The figure with the sword turned to face Samuel. It raised one hand, gesturing to the center of the stone circle. "Look."
Samuel dismounted. His legs felt shaky, but he walked forward into the circle. At first, he saw nothing special, just moss, just stones. Then the bell rang 3 times, and the world shifted. He could still see the swamp, but also something else. 2 places existing in the same space, like looking through water at what lay beneath. The stones weren't crumbling anymore. They stood tall, newly carved, glowing with a light that wasn't quite fire and wasn't quite sun. And around them, people. Dozens of people, hundreds maybe. They carried bundles, led animals, held hands. Refugees, he realized, people fleeing something terrible. And guiding them, protecting them, the guardians.
But these guardians were alive, flesh and blood, knights in armor that had seen better days, carrying weapons they clearly knew how to use. They moved among the refugees with purpose, directing them, protecting them. One of them, the one with the sword, stood at the edge of the circle, facing outward, toward a darkness Samuel could feel, but not quite see. Something wrong, something hungry. The knight raised his sword, spoke words Samuel couldn't hear, and the darkness recoiled. The refugees passed through the stones safely, one by one, family by family. They moved from one world to another, from danger to safety. And the knight stood guard, making sure nothing followed. The vision faded. Samuel was back in the present, standing in a circle of old stones with fog and night pressing close. But now he understood. The guardians hadn't been guarding treasure or territory. They'd been guarding a door, a passage between worlds, between times, between the living and the dead. And even now, centuries later, they kept watch, making sure the door stayed closed, making sure nothing from the other side crossed over, making sure nothing from this side wandered through by accident. The figure with the sword lowered his hand. In the blue light, Samuel thought he saw the ghost of a smile. "You understand now." Yes," Samuel whispered. "I understand." The bell rang once, soft and final. The lights began to drift away, back toward the deeper swamp. The guardians turned, following them. Their duty continued, endless and patient. But before they disappeared into the fog, the one with the sword looked back, raised his hand in what might have been a salute or a blessing. Samuel raised his own hand in response. "Thank you," he said, "for showing me, for letting me see." The figure nodded once, then turned and walked into the fog, becoming one with the shadows and mist. Samuel stood alone in the circle of stones. No, not alone, never alone. The guardians were still there, just beyond sight, still watching, still protecting. He walked back to Molly, who had waited patiently. "Come on, girl, let's go home." But as he swung into the saddle, he realized something. He'd called LaGrasse home, a town he'd known for less than a day, and somehow it felt right. Maybe the guardians had shown him more than just their duty. Maybe they'd shown him his own. The ride back to town was peaceful. The fog parted for them, the path clear and easy. No lights followed, no bells rang, but Samuel felt their presence, gentle and constant, a reminder that some duties transcended death, that some oaths were kept beyond the grave.
When he reached LaGrasse, the boarding house woman was sitting on her porch like she'd been waiting. "You went back," she said. "I did. Did you find what you were looking for?" Samuel thought about this, about the vision, the stones, the patient guardian standing watch over a door between worlds. "I found something better," he said. "I found purpose." The woman smiled. "Then they chose well." Samuel led Molly to the small stable behind the boarding house. As he brushed her down, fed her, made sure she was comfortable, he thought about the old man's words. "My husband started helping people, ferry service for folks who needed to cross at night." Maybe that was it. Maybe seeing the guardians meant understanding that some people needed help crossing from one place to another, one life to another, one world to another. And maybe Samuel could be one of those helpers. He stood in the stable doorway looking at the marsh. Fog moved through the trees, mysterious and soft. Somewhere out there, the guardians stood watch, patient as stone, faithful as death. Samuel touched his hat brim in salute, then went inside to sleep, truly at peace for the first time in years.
Samuel stayed in LaGrasse, not because he had to, but because leaving felt wrong, like walking away from a job half finished. He rented a room from the boarding house woman. Her name was Iris, he learned, and started asking around about work. "What kind of work you looking for?" asked the man with missing fingers. His name was Dutch, which Samuel thought was funny since Dutch had lived in Louisiana his whole life and had never been north of Arkansas. "Whatever needs doing," Samuel said. They were sitting on the dock watching the morning sun burn off the fog. "I'm good with horses, decent with a hammer, can fish if someone shows me how." Dutch lit a pipe, considering. "Town's not big enough to need much. Most folks here do their own work." "Then I'll find something else." "Like what?" Samuel watched the marsh. A heron stood in the shallow water, perfectly still, waiting for fish, patient as the guardians themselves. "Like helping people get through the swamp," he said. Dutch nearly dropped his pipe. "You want to be a guide? Through there?" He jerked his head toward the cypress trees. "Someone should be. You said it yourself. People get lost. People need help." "That's because people are stupid and don't listen." "Then I'll make sure they listen." Dutch studied him with those weathered eyes. "The guardians showed you something, didn't they? Second night you went in." "They did." "And now you feel obligated?" "I feel like it's what I'm supposed to do. Can't explain it better than that." Dutch puffed his pipe, thinking. Finally, he said, "My cousin might have a boat you can buy. Small one, good for shallow water. And I can teach you the channels, the safe paths. But Sam," he paused, "you take this on. You're taking on more than just a job. You understand that?" "I think so." "No, I mean really understand. The marsh will test you. The guardians will test you. Every person you ferry across, you're responsible for. Not just their bodies, but their souls. Some of them will be good people. Some won't. You have to help them all the same." Samuel thought about the vision, the refugees fleeing something terrible. The knights hadn't asked who deserved saving. They just saved everyone. "I understand," he said. The boat cost most of what Samuel had left. It was 12 feet long,
flat-bottomed, perfect for moving through shallow swamp water. Dutch's cousin threw in 2 long poles for pushing through the mud and a lantern that supposedly never went out, no matter how wet it got. "My grandfather used this," the cousin said. "He was younger than Dutch, maybe 40, with a beard that came down to his chest. Said it was blessed, don't know by who or what, but it's never failed me." Samuel hung the lantern at the bow. In daylight, it looked ordinary, just metal and glass, but he had a feeling it would be different at night. Dutch spent 3 days teaching Samuel the waterways, which channels were deep enough for the boat, which ones would bog you down, where the gators liked to sun themselves, where the water moccasins nested. "This time of year, snakes are everywhere," Dutch said, poling them around a cypress knee. "Don't kill them unless you have to. They were here first. Just avoid them." "What about gators?" "Same rule. They'll leave you alone if you leave them alone, mostly." Dutch showed Samuel a scar on his forearm. "Got careless once, reached into water without looking. A juvenile gator took offense. I was lucky his mama wasn't around." They practiced for hours each day. Samuel learned to read the water, to see the difference between solid ground and mud that would swallow a boat. He learned the sound of the swamp, which birds meant rain coming, which frog calls meant gators nearby. And at night, alone in his room, he thought about the guardians. Were they watching? Did they approve of what he was doing? He hoped so.
His first customer came on a Thursday. She was maybe 60, with gray hair pulled back in a tight bun and eyes that had seen too much. She carried a single bag and moved like every bone hurt. "Are you the ferryman?" she asked. Samuel was working on the boat, replacing a worn section of rope. "I can be," he said. "Where you headed?" "Through the marsh, to the other side." "There's a road that goes around," Samuel said gently. "Takes longer, but it's safer." "I don't have longer." She set down her bag. "I'm dying. Got maybe a month, the doctor says. My daughter lives on the other side of the swamp, and I want to see her before—" She didn't finish. Samuel stood up. "When do you want to leave?" "Tonight, if possible." "It's possible," Samuel said, "but it'll cost you." She named a price that was more than fair. Samuel almost told her it was too much, but he remembered what Dutch had said. You're responsible for their souls. Taking charity when she wanted to pay would hurt her pride. "That'll do," he said. "Be here at sunset." The old woman's name was Marguerite. She sat in the middle of the boat, her bag clutched on her lap as Samuel poled them into the marsh. "You done this before?" she asked. "Few times," Samuel lied. This was actually his first paying customer, but she didn't need to know that. The sun was setting, painting the water orange and red. Birds called their evening songs. Everything looked peaceful, almost pretty. But Samuel could feel it starting, the shift from day to night, the moment when the marsh became something else. "Do you believe in ghosts?" Marguerite asked suddenly. "Yes, ma'am." "Good, because they're real and they're all through these waters. Lost souls mostly, people who died badly or stayed too long." She looked at Samuel. "You know why I wanted to cross at night?" "Why's that?" "Because the dead are easier to face in the dark. In daylight you can pretend they're not there, but at night," she smiled sad, "at night you have to acknowledge them." The fog began to rise. Samuel lit the lantern at the bow. It flared to life immediately, burning bright and steady. The flame was white gold, warm, nothing like the cold blue of the Guardian's lights. But as they moved deeper into the swamp, Samuel saw the blue lights too, distant, watching. Marguerite saw them as well. "There," she whispered, "the Guardians." "You've seen them before?" asked Samuel. "Once, 50 years ago, when I was a girl.
My father brought me through on a night like this, said we were running from bad men, needed to disappear. The guardians let us pass." She was quiet for a moment. "My father said they were knights from the old world, protectors of the innocent." "That's what I heard, too." "Are you innocent?" Marguerite asked. Samuel pulled them around a submerged log. "No, ma'am, but I'm trying to be useful." She laughed at that, a dry sound. "Useful is better than innocent. Innocent doesn't last." They were halfway through when the bell rang. 3 chimes, clear and close. The blue lights moved toward them, not threatening, just coming closer. Marguerite gripped her bag tighter. "They want to see us." "It's okay," Samuel said, though his heart was pounding. "They're just checking." The lights formed a circle around the boat, and behind them, the guardians themselves. 7 of them tonight, maybe more in the fog beyond. The one with the sword stood directly ahead. Its presence filled the air, heavy and old. It looked at Marguerite, really looked, the way it had looked at Samuel. Marguerite met its gaze. "I'm dying," she said simply. "I just want to see my daughter, that's all." The guardian didn't move for a long moment. Then it raised its sword in a salute. The blade caught the lantern light, glinting despite the rust. Permission granted. The lights parted, creating a path through the water. Samuel pulled forward, following the passage they'd made. As they passed the guardian with the sword, Marguerite reached out. Her fingers almost touched the figure's hand. "Thank you," she whispered, "for protecting people like me." The guardian inclined his head, just slightly. Then they were past, moving into clearer water, and the lights faded behind them.
They reached the other side an hour before midnight. There was a small landing there, and a house with lights in the windows. As Samuel helped Marguerite onto the dock, a woman ran out of the house. Younger, maybe 30, with Marguerite's eyes. "Mama!" she cried. "Mama, you came!" They embraced, crying, and Samuel felt something tight in his chest loosen. This was right. This was what he was supposed to do. Marguerite turned back to him. "You have a gift, young man. Don't waste it." "I won't, ma'am." And the guardians, they chose well. Before Samuel could respond, she pressed something into his hand. Money, more than they'd agreed on. "I can't take this," he started. "You can and will. You didn't just ferry my body. You helped me face the dead with dignity. That's worth every penny." She squeezed his hand once, then turned back to her daughter. Samuel pulled away from the dock, back into the marsh. The return journey felt different, lighter somehow, like something good had been accomplished. The guardians appeared again, briefly, just the lights this time, drifting between the trees like blessings. Samuel raised his hand to them. "Thank you for letting her through." The bell rang once, soft and approving. When he got back to Lagris, Dutch was waiting on the dock. "How'd it go?" he asked. "Good," Samuel said. "Really good." Dutch helped him tie up the boat. "Woman got to her daughter safe?" "She did." "How'd you know about the daughter?" "Small town. Everybody knows everything." Dutch lit his pipe. "You did well, Sam. The marsh accepted you. The guardians accepted you. That's rare." "It felt right," Samuel said, "like it was what I was meant to do." "Probably was," Dutch puffed his pipe. "Get some sleep. Word's already spreading. You'll have more customers soon." Dutch was right. Over the next 2 weeks, Samuel ferried 7 more people through the marsh. A young couple running away to get married, a preacher heading to a revival, a gambler fleeing debt collectors, a widow returning to her childhood home.
Each crossing was different. Each person had their own story, their own reasons for braving the swamp at night. And every single time, the guardians appeared. Sometimes just the lights, sometimes the full figures, always watching, always judging. They let the good people pass easily. The questionable ones, like the gambler, got more scrutiny. The guardians formed a tighter circle, their lights brighter, more intense. But they always let Samuel make the final call. And Samuel learned to read people the way Dutch had taught him to read the water, learned to see who was running from something real versus running from themselves, learned the difference between fear and guilt. One night he ferried a man who wouldn't meet his eyes, middle-aged, nervous, sweating despite the cool air. "Just need to get across, as fast as possible," the man said. The guardians appeared almost immediately, not just a few, all of them, maybe a dozen, forming a wall across the water. The bell rang, harsh and warning. Samuel stopped the boat. "What's wrong?" the man asked. "They won't let you pass," Samuel said quietly. "What? Who won't?" "The guardians, the protectors of the marsh." Samuel looked at the man. "What are you running from?" "Nothing. I just need to get across." The guardians moved closer. The air grew cold. "Tell me the truth, or I turn this boat around right now." The man's face crumbled. "I did something bad. There's a woman back in town. I hurt her, and now her brothers are looking for me, and I just need to get away. Please, I can pay." "No," Samuel said. "What?" "The guardians protect the innocent. They protect people who deserve protection. You don't qualify." Samuel began turning the boat around.
The man lunged at him. "You can't!" A blue light flashed between them, so bright it hurt to look at. The man fell back, screaming. Samuel didn't even flinch. Don't touch the ferryman. That's rule number 1. The guardians formed an escort, surrounding the boat as Samuel pulled back toward LaGrasse. The man sat in the bottom of the boat, whimpering, staring at the lights like they might devour him at any moment. They might have, Samuel thought, if he'd pushed harder. When they reached the dock, the woman's brothers were waiting. Dutch must have sent word. "This him?" one of them asked. "This is him," Samuel said. They pulled the man out of the boat. Samuel didn't watch what happened next. Some things were better left alone. But as he cleaned the boat afterward, he felt the guardian's approval, a warmth in the air despite the cool night. He'd made the right choice. A month after he'd started, Samuel sat with Iris on her porch. She'd made sweet tea, and they watched the sunset paint the marsh in gold and purple. "You've found your calling," she said. "Seems like it. My husband would have liked you. You've got the same look he had, like you've seen beyond the veil and can't unsee it." Samuel sipped his tea. "Do you ever miss him?" "Every day. But I feel him sometimes out there in the marsh, like he's still ferrying people, just from the other side now. Maybe he is. Maybe he's one of them now, one of the guardians." She smiled. He'd like that, being useful forever. They sat in comfortable silence as the stars came out. Somewhere in the marsh, a bell rang softly. Samuel smiled. "Another crossing tomorrow." "How do you know?" "The guardians tell me. Not in words, but I know." Iris patted his hand. "You're a good man, Samuel. A good ferryman. The marsh is lucky to have you." "I'm lucky to have the marsh," he said. And he meant it. That night, Samuel dreamed of the stone circle, of the refugees passing through, of the knights standing guard, eternal and patient. In the dream, he stood among them,
not as a knight, but as a helper, opening the door, guiding people through, making sure they found their way safely. When he woke, the bell was ringing, 3 chimes calling him to work. Samuel dressed in the dark, grabbed his lantern, and headed to the dock. A woman waited there, old, tired, carrying nothing but a worn shawl. "She needs to cross," she said. "Then let's cross," Samuel replied. He helped her into the boat, lit the lantern, and pushed off into the marsh. The fog welcomed them, the water parted, and the guardians appeared, their blue lights gentle and guiding. Samuel poled through the darkness, steady and sure, knowing he was exactly where he was supposed to be. A ferryman between worlds, a helper of souls, a keeper of the old ways. And in the marsh, the guardians watched over them all, patient as stone, faithful as death.
Winter came to the marsh. Not the kind of winter Samuel had known in Virginia, with snow piling up and ice thick enough to walk on. This was a Louisiana winter. Cold mornings, fog that lasted until noon, nights where your breath made clouds, but the water never quite froze. Samuel had been ferrying people for 3 months now. He'd lost count of how many crossings he'd made. 50? More? Each one different, each one necessary. The town knew him now, trusted him. When someone needed to cross the marsh at night, they came to Samuel. And Samuel never said no, as long as the guardians allowed it. He'd learned their language by now. The way the lights moved told him things. Fast meant danger, slow meant approval. When they circled tight, someone was lying. When they spread out like stars, the path was clear. The bell spoke too. 1 chime meant caution, 3 meant blessing, and sometimes, rarely, the bell rang 7 times. Samuel had only heard that once, when he'd ferried a woman who'd been running from men who wanted to kill her. 7 chimes meant protected, meant sacred, meant the guardians themselves would intervene if anyone tried to follow. Now, sitting on the dock on a cold December morning, Samuel watched the fog and thought about how strange his life had become. "You look thoughtful." He turned. Dutch was walking down the dock, carrying 2 cups of coffee. He handed one to Samuel and sat down with a grunt. "Just thinking about how I ended up here," Samuel said. "Fate?" Dutch said simply. "Or the guardians. Same thing, maybe." They drank in comfortable silence. The marsh was quiet this morning. Even the frogs seemed to be sleeping in. "Got a question for you," Dutch said after a while. "And you don't have to answer if you don't want to." "Okay." "You ever think about crossing over? Not the marsh, I mean really crossing, to the other side?" Samuel looked at him. "You mean dying?" "I mean joining them, the guardians, becoming one of them." Dutch stared at his coffee. "My cousin said his grandfather told him once that the guardians choose new members sometimes, people who've proven themselves, people who understand the duty." "I haven't thought about it," Samuel lied, because he had. Late at night, when the crossings were done and he lay in his small room listening to the marsh, he'd thought about what it would mean to stand eternal watch, to never rest, but also never abandon the duty. Part of him found it terrifying. Part of him found it beautiful. "Well, if they ever ask, you let me know first. I'll want to say goodbye properly." Samuel smiled. "Deal."
The next crossing came that afternoon. A man named Thomas, maybe 30 years old, with haunted eyes and hands that wouldn't stop shaking. He carried a Bible and wore a cross around his neck. "I need to reach the other side. There's a monastery there. I'm going to take vows." "Becoming a monk?" "Trying to." Thomas looked at the marsh. "I did things in the war, bad things. I need to make peace with God, and I can't do it out here in the world. Too many distractions, too many memories." Samuel studied him, saw the guilt, the shame, but also something else, determination, a genuine desire to be better. "The crossing won't be easy," Samuel said. "The marsh shows you things, makes you face what you're running from." "Good," Thomas said. "I need to face it." They set out at dusk. The winter light faded fast, and soon the lantern was the only brightness in a world of gray and black. The guardians appeared quickly. They always responded to people carrying religious symbols or speaking of vows. Samuel had learned that the guardians respected faith, regardless of the form it took. But tonight something was different. There were more of them, many more. They filled the waterways, standing on roots and small islands, their blue lights creating a forest of cold stars. And in the center, the one with the sword. But he wasn't alone.
Another figure stood beside him, taller, broader, carrying a massive shield marked with symbols that hurt to look at directly. This guardian radiated power, ancient and absolute. The bell rang, not 3 times, not 7, 12 times, slow, deliberate, echoing across the water. Thomas fell to his knees in the boat. "What's happening?" "I don't know," Samuel admitted. His hands gripped the pole tight. "But don't be afraid. They're not here to hurt us." The guardian with the shield moved forward. It walked on the water itself, each step creating ripples of blue light. When it reached the boat, it stopped and looked at Samuel. Not at Thomas, at Samuel. Samuel's breath caught. "Me?" The guardian raised its hand. In its palm, something glowed, a small object, round, made of metal that might have been silver or might have been light itself. A bell. Understanding hit Samuel like a fist. "You want me to join you?" The guardian nodded once. I can't. I'm alive. I have..." He stopped. What did he have? No family, no home except La Grace, no purpose except the ferrying, and the ferrying was just an extension of what the guardians did. He was already part of their duty. "Samuel?" Thomas whispered. "What's happening?" "They're asking me to become one of them," Samuel said softly. "To be a guardian forever." "That's..." Thomas looked around at the assembled figures. "That's an honor." "That's a life sentence." "No," Thomas said. "That's a life's purpose. Some people never find theirs. You found yours 3 months ago. They're just asking you to commit." Samuel looked at the guardian with the shield. "What happens if I say yes?" The guardian gestured toward the water. Samuel understood. He'd have to leave the boat, leave his body, become like them, spirit and duty, eternal and unchanging. "Can I finish this crossing first?"
he asked. The guardian seemed to consider this, then nodded. Relief flooded through Samuel. "Thank you." The guardians parted, creating a path. Samuel pulled forward, his mind reeling. Join them, become eternal, never rest, but never abandon the duty. Part of him screamed to refuse, to run, to cling to life. But another part, the part that had been growing since his first crossing, whispered, "This is what you've been moving toward. This is why you came to the marsh." They reached the other side. The monastery was small, old, built of stone that looked like it had been there for centuries. Monks in brown robes waited at the dock. Thomas stood up, steadier now. "Thank you," he said to Samuel, "for the crossing, and—" he paused. "Whatever you decide, know that you helped me. You gave me safe passage when I needed it most." "That's the job," Samuel said. "No," Thomas said firmly. "That's the calling. There's a difference." He stepped onto the dock, then turned back. "If you join them, I'll pray for you. Every day. I'll make sure you're remembered." "I'd appreciate that." The monks led Thomas away. Samuel sat in the boat, alone except for the lantern's warm light. The return journey was silent. The guardians didn't appear. They were giving him time to think. When he reached La Grasse, Iris was waiting. Somehow she always knew when something important was happening. "You asked me," she said, not a question. "They did. And?" "I don't know," Samuel said honestly. "Part of me wants to say yes. Part of me is terrified." Iris helped him tie up the boat. "My husband said something once, right before he died. He said, 'I wish I could stay, not for me, but for the people who still need crossing.' I told him he'd done enough, that he could rest, and you know what he said?" "What?" "He said, 'Some duties are too important to leave to chance. Someone has to stand watch.'" She looked at Samuel. 3 days later he passed, and that very night the ferry service started having problems. Boats sinking, people getting lost. It took 5 years before things settled down again. "You think he became a guardian?" "I think he would have if they'd asked him, but they didn't. Maybe because he was too old, too tired. Maybe because they were waiting for someone else." She touched Samuel's arm. "They waited for you, Sam, and now they're asking." Samuel spent 3 days thinking. He ferried people during those days, a merchant, a family, a lone traveler. Each crossing felt different now, weighted with meaning. Each person he helped across was a reminder of why the duty mattered. On the 3rd night, Dutch found him on the dock. "You're going to say yes," Dutch said. "How'd you know?" "Because you've got that look, the same look my cousin's grandfather had. The look of someone who's already decided, but is trying to find the courage to follow through." Dutch sat down beside him. "It's okay to be scared." "I'm terrified," Samuel admitted. "Eternal duty sounds noble in stories, but forever? Actually forever? That's exactly what it is. No retirement, no peace, just watching, guarding, protecting, forever. So why am I considering it? Because you've seen what happens when no one guards the doors. You've seen the refugees in your vision, the people who needed protection, and you know that need doesn't stop. It never stops. Dutch lit his pipe. The Guardians aren't prisoners, Sam. They're volunteers. They chose this, and they keep choosing it every moment of every day. What if I'm not strong enough? You ferried an old woman to see her daughter before she died. You turned back a man who hurt people. You've helped dozens cross safely while keeping the wrong ones out. You're already doing the work. Dutch puffed his pipe. The Guardians are only doing it forever.
Samuel watched the marsh. The fog was rolling in, thick and soft. "If I say yes," he said slowly, "will you make sure people remember that I wasn't just some ferryman who disappeared? I'll tell your story until I die," Dutch promised, "and I'll make sure my kids tell it, and their kids. The town won't forget Samuel, the ferryman who became a guardian. That's all I want, not to be forgotten. You won't be. Guards never are." On the fourth night, Samuel poled his boat into the marsh one last time. He'd said his goodbyes to Iris, who'd cried but understood, to Dutch, who'd shaken his hand and called him brother, to the few other people in town who knew him. He'd given away his possessions, the room, the clothes, the money he'd saved, kept only what he'd need for one final crossing: himself. The Guardians were waiting, all of them, even the ones Samuel had never seen before. They formed a corridor of blue light leading to the stone circle, the place where worlds touched. Samuel poled slowly, savoring the feel of the boat beneath him, the pole in his hands, the lantern's warm glow. These were human things, and soon he'd be beyond human. The Guardian with the sword stood at the circle's edge, the one with the shield beside him. Between them, a space, waiting. Samuel beached the boat and stepped onto the moss. His legs felt shaky, but he walked forward. "I'm ready," he said, "if you'll have me." The Guardian with the shield extended its hand. In the palm, the small bell. Samuel took it. The metal was cold, so cold it burned, but he didn't let go. The bell rang once in his hand, then again, then a third time, and the world shifted. Samuel felt his body falling away like an old coat he no longer needed. No pain, just release, a lightness he'd never experienced. His vision changed. He could see more now, the layers of the world, the thin places where spirits crossed, the doors between life and death. The marsh wasn't just a swamp anymore. It was a junction, a crossroads, a meeting place of worlds, and it needed guardians. He looked down at himself, saw the faint shimmer of his form, no longer solid, but not quite ghost either, something in between, something eternal. The Guardian with the sword, Samuel could see him clearly now, see the man he'd been before, a knight named Marcus,
dead for 700 years, but still faithful to his vow, still protecting. Marcus smiled. "Welcome, brother." The words came not through sound, but through knowing, guardian speech, older than language. Samuel smiled back, felt the weight of duty settle on him, but also the rightness of it. Other guardians approached. Some he'd seen, some he hadn't. They formed a circle around him, and Samuel understood he was being welcomed into an ancient order, the kind of order that transcended time and death.
One of them handed him a staff, simple wood but strong, a ferryman's pole, eternal. Another placed something on his head, not a crown, but a circlet of woven marsh grass that would never wilt. The guardian with the shield raised its hand. From the water light rose, blue and cold and beautiful. It swirled around Samuel, seeping into him, becoming part of him. He felt his duty lock into place, felt the marsh recognize him, felt the doors between worlds acknowledge his guardianship. Samuel the ferryman was gone. Samuel the guardian was born. Time moved differently now. Samuel stood watch as weeks became months, became years. He learned the patience of stones, the endurance of water. He watched the seasons turn, watched people come and go, watched the world change while the marsh remained constant. New ferrymen came to La Grasse, some good, some not. Samuel and the other guardians judged them, guided them, protected the people they carried. Dutch died after 12 years. Samuel was there, standing in the fog as the old man's spirit passed through. Dutch saw him, recognized him, and smiled. "Knew you'd stick around," Dutch whispered with his last breath. "I keep my promises," Samuel replied, in the language of guardians. Iris lasted longer, 23 years. When her time came, she crossed the marsh one last time in spirit form, and Samuel guided her personally, showed her the way to wherever souls went when their stories were finished. "Thank you," she said, fading, "for staying, for guarding." "Someone has to," Samuel said. "Might as well be me." The town changed. Buildings came and went. People lived and died. The marsh remained. And Samuel remained. 50 years after his transformation, a young woman came to the marsh. She was running from something. Samuel could tell by the fear in her eyes, the way she kept looking over her shoulder. She'd hired a ferryman, a nervous man who didn't understand the water. The boat got stuck. The man panicked, started pushing in the wrong direction. Samuel appeared. He and 3 other guardians surrounded the boat, their lights guiding it back to the safe channel. The woman saw them, really saw them. "Who are you?" she whispered. "Guardians," Samuel replied, knowing she could hear. "Protectors of the lost." "Are you angels?" "No, just soldiers who couldn't stop fighting. The war changes, but the duty remains." "What do you guard?" "The paths between worlds, the doors that should stay closed, the people who need help crossing from one life to another." The woman thought about this. "How long have you been doing this?" "Forever, and not long enough."
100 years passed, then 200. Samuel lost track after a while. Time was like water. It flowed, but guardians stood steady. He saw cars replace horses, saw planes fly overhead,
saw the marsh shrink as people drained it for farmland, then saw it grow back as people realized they needed the wetlands. He saw wars, refugees fleeing through the marsh, just like in the ancient vision. Samuel and the guardians protected them, guided them, made sure the wrong people didn't follow. He saw love, young couples sneaking across to be together. Samuel always let them pass, remembering what it felt like to be human and hopeful. He saw death, so much death, but he learned that death wasn't the end, just a doorway, and some doorways needed guardians. New guardians joined their ranks, a fisherman who'd drowned saving children, a woman who'd spent her life helping slaves escape through the swamp, a soldier who'd held a bridge against impossible odds. Each one chose duty over rest. Each one understood what Samuel had learned that night 3 centuries ago. Some duties are too important to leave to chance. Present day. Samuel stood in the marsh, his form barely visible even to those who looked for him. Centuries of watching had worn him down to essence, duty and purpose, barely clothed in memory of flesh. A boat moved through the water, modern with a motor, but stuck in the mud. The driver was cursing, trying to free it. Samuel moved closer, saw a young boy in the boat, maybe 8 years old, looking scared. The driver, the boy's father from the resemblance, was getting angry, making bad choices, about to make the boat worse. Samuel manifested fully, let the man see him. The father froze. "What the hell?" The boy whispered, "Dad, I think he wants to help." Samuel pointed, showed the safe channel, showed where to push. The father, pale but pragmatic, followed the directions. The boat came free. As they motored away, the boy looked back. He waved. Samuel waved back, wondered if the boy would remember, wondered if someday the boy might come back, might choose the duty. It was possible. The guardians always needed new members. The world always needed people willing to stand watch. That night, as Samuel took his place among the stone circle, Marcus approached. "You've been with us a long time, brother." "Yes," Samuel agreed. "Long enough to rest if you wish. Your duty is fulfilled. Your debt is paid." Samuel looked at the marsh, at the pathways between worlds, at the doors that still needed guarding. "No," he said, "not yet. Maybe not ever." Marcus smiled. "That's what I thought you'd say." "Why?" "Because you understand now. The duty isn't a burden, it's a privilege, to protect, to guide, to stand between the living and the dead and make sure both are honored." Samuel nodded. His hand touched the small bell at his waist, the one he'd carried for 300 years. It rang softly, a sound only guardians could hear. In the distance, another boat entered the marsh, another person needing safe passage. Samuel moved toward it, ready. The other guardians fell in beside him, a silent brotherhood bound by choice and duty. Together they guided the traveler through the darkness, protected them from the dangers in the water and the dangers in themselves, made sure they reached the other side safely. And when the crossing was finished, they returned to their watch, patient as stone, faithful as death, eternal as the marsh itself. Somewhere in the swamp, a bell rang 3 times, and Samuel
The guardian smiled, knowing his duty would never end, and grateful for it.